Welcome to another episode of ActivateenCC, where we cross the chasm with community chats. Welcome to ActivateenCC. Today we are talking about self-doubt, how we can move from self-doubt to self-confidence. Low self-esteem can be particularly hard for young people, especially when they're doing things like starting high school or college or work, forming new friendships and relationships. And among high school students, 44% of girls and 15% of guys are attempting to lose weight. 75% of girls with low self-esteem are engaging in negative activities like cutting, bullying, smoking, drinking, or disordered eating. And this compares with 25% of girls with high self-esteem. So we are delighted to have Shenal Arimili, who's a transformational and manifestation mentor, international speaker, author, trainer, and facilitator. Shenal graduated from UCal Berkeley with a bachelor's degree in physiology and went on to receive her master's degree in physical therapy. And after years of clinical practice, she climbed the corporate ladder in healthcare management and administration as hospital director of clinical services. And then she dropped off that path and went off to follow her entrepreneurial spirit. So I'm so happy to have you here, Shenal. We are also joined by a senior at UC San Diego, Amaya Mali, and young filmmaker and Activateen's digital content producer, Santiago Castellanos. So I'd love to just, turn this over to you, Shenal, for to give us your perspective on our topic today.
Wow. Well, thank you, first of all, Shaku. I think I have to start with thanking you for the creation of Activateen. In the years of work that I've been working on transformational, life-changing things with people all around the world, what I recognize is that when we can touch our teens, we can touch our youth, we can touch the young adults in this world, I actually feel that not only will we have a happier world, we'll have a healthier world, and we'll be absolutely living in a lot more abundance in every way possible. And so your mission of really impacting this generation that's up and coming really warms my heart. So thank you for your work. And thank you for having me. And yeah, I would love to hear also from these two young adults, but I see that self-confidence, there's so many words we can look at when we think about the energy of self-confidence. We can look at what power do I have? Am I being controlled or am I not? These are the things that play into self-confidence. Do I follow my heart? We think of confidence as just sometimes the ability to stand strong and have sometimes almost, some people see it as almost an aggressive stance. But there's so much power that each one of us has, and that we want to engage our youth in really developing. And it isn't just how powerful we come across from an aggressive standpoint, but it's a soft but very powerful presence. And it's a presence that comes when our youth can find that safe space to follow their heart, to trust in their inner voice, to have the courage to speak up and ask, whether it's their parents, whether it's a professor, whether it's a new employer, to ask for what it is that's important to them. And that self-confidence kind of covers a much broader gamut, I sense and feel, than just somebody who's, gets out there and says what they want to say, but it's someone who really can go beyond that. It's speaking truth. It's following your heart. It's allowing your gifts to be shown and shared in the world. That also is self-confidence. And I would love to see all of our youth step into that. And I know that many struggle with that. And so, it would be nice to hear a little bit about what these two young adults have to say about where they feel that self-confidence might lack, or where they struggle in stepping into that strength. And is it about following their heart that they're most scared of? Or is it speaking up and asking? What is it? What is it that struggles most youth today?
Santiago, would you like to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that for me, the problem with self-confidence is that a lot of people my age, we are often told that you need to be doing something specifically, like nowadays, to be useful. Like you need to be majoring in something specific to be someone in life and to have money and to have a family and to be able to just like make ends meet and everything. But I feel like what a lot of people are not understanding is that in society, in life, we need one person to do every single thing. If we all major in the same thing, if we all work in the same thing, we wouldn't have the world that we have. And I grew up, like in my college experience, I surrounded myself with people that they majored in engineering and stuff like that. And I was the one that was at communications, and people often looked at me like it wasn't up to par with them because I wasn't doing something as complex or as complicated or as important. And I remember one time I traveled to Houston and I met a bunch of people that worked at Exxon. And when they asked me what I graduated on, I told them, and then they said, they looked at me and they were like, ooh, okay, like, what are you going to do with that? And I was like, if there aren't people like me that follow this path, whenever you're trying to take a break from your job and you go home on the weekends and you turn on your TV, you would have nothing to watch. Whatever you take, like for entertainment or anything, that wouldn't exist if there wasn't people like me that took this path. Same thing for journalists and artists and musicians and everything. And people are used to like shame people for, I don't know, maybe following unconventional careers, but at the end of the day, we need people to do that. And I understood early in my career that I was doing the thing that I'm good at. I don't need to be fitting other places just because people are telling me. I know that I'm good at this, and this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And I know that by following my heart and doing what I know that I can do, I'm going to be successful. Like, just maybe not now, maybe not in a year, maybe not in 2 years, but eventually this is what I'm supposed to do. So I'm going to be successful eventually.
Oh, it just makes my heart sing when I hear you speak this way, because do you see what's right here? Can you read that?
Yeah.
Listen to your heart, because that's actually what brings, of course, the author here is in a peace. But it does bring inner peace. And actually, truthfully, because I'm also a manifestation mentor, when we follow our heart, we actually are more aligned energetically with abundance. It's the old mindsets that hold so many children back, and truthfully, so many adults, is that they feel that they have to do what they're supposed to do and not what they're here to do.
Yeah.
And so, gosh, that's beautiful. That's a state of confidence. Keep it up.
Thank you.
Amaya?
What about Amaya?
Yeah, so I completely agree with Santiago. My path as in college and everything, it's not unconventional. I kind of went into college knowing, okay, I really wanted to mix art and really go into the tech industry because, you know, when you go into college, when you go after graduating high school, it becomes this big thing where you're like, is what I'm going to do be worth the investment of how much I'm going to pay for education, which is already something that we're tackling now when remote learning comes in, and is college worth it and stuff, which is a different conversation, but it comes into what you want to learn. And I think the biggest thing that I have gained when going in and studying as a UX designer is you begin to not really have confidence in yourself, but you become to have confidence in your passion and in your work and why your work is important for the world around you, or even for that community that you're going to go into after college. And I totally understand what Santiago was talking about. I have a lot of friends that were computer science majors and data scientists and engineers and even pre-med and pre-law. And they have, and you see that there's this kind of like a more clear path of like, oh, there's a lot of job demand for that. And what do you do? Or design isn't as important when you're developing products, because you need software engineering for that, or you need data, or you need tech developers. But you begin to, the more you learn about what you want to do with your life, the more you realize this is important, and I'm going to be not only confident in what I'm going to do, but I'm going to be an advocate for it. And so when you go outside of college, or when you get out into the field, and when you talk to people and they say, why should I hire you instead of another computer engineer or someone who minored in what you're doing? You really become an advocate and say, well, they don't know it completely. They just have the tools. They don't know how to use the tools. They don't know how to think like I do, which will create more empathy towards your users, give a storytelling. And you learn how to do this the more you talk to people in your field. And the biggest thing that I found when I did my internship at IBM is, I believe 11 out of the 17 interns that I was with, they didn't study design. We had people studying music, anthropology, psychology. And the reason why they were just as important is that they brought another perspective. And when you're telling a story, you don't want to just target one person. You don't want to sell a product or be conveying to one small unit. You want to be able to understand a community of different people. And the only way you can understand that is by having different perspectives. So it is as important to have engineers as it is to have people in marketing, people in communication, people who can mold that story, like video editors and producers. And so I saw that with me, and then I also see it with my little sister. She's going into animation, and it sounds so narrow. Either you learn animation and either you become an animator and that's it, but in an animation studio. But when you talk to other people, you realize companies, you realize nonprofits, all these places, they need people to tell their story too. And who better to tell that than people in communications, in art and video filming and animation. So you learn to become confident in yourself and what you do while you become an advocate for your passion and for your community of work.
Yeah, I love that, Amaya. I think one of my favorite quotes is from Whenever I Am Exhausted. It's from David White, and he says, the antidote to stress is not relaxation. The antidote to stress is wholeheartedness. And a lot of times when we are working on what we enjoy, we don't know where the time has gone. We're just in that moment, and that itself is meditation, because meditation is that focus where time blurs and boundaries disappear. And a lot of times for this conversation, we're talking about self-doubt, low self-esteem, and a lot of that comes from our conditioning, right? And Shenal, I'd like to ask you about what you and I were discussing about the state of survival that you mentioned that we're all in.
I would love to address this. If I were to ask even Santiago and Amaya, if you could just imagine for a moment the things that have made you afraid in life. Maybe you're very confident in one area, but maybe in terms of personal relationships, or speaking up to a parent, or to someone. If you think about those fears that we hold, that anxiety that's triggered when we have to do something that's really uncomfortable to us or for us, what we're really doing is we're living in a state of survival. And so if you imagine those moments of anything that you may be afraid of, and we're all evolving through breaking free of these fears. But when we're in those fears, we're in a state of survival, and it's as if we're living with a tiger in the room. And when there's a tiger, so for someone, let's say the two of you have had the courage to follow your heart in terms of your career. But for the many people who may not be doing that, for them, choosing what's in their heart is no different than living with a tiger in the room. And living with a tiger in the room allows us to only really do three things in life. Because if there's a tiger, we're going to either fight it, we're going to run from it, we're going to hide from it. So many people hide their talents and their gifts because they're afraid of what people will think. It's the tiger in the room. So and of course we won't go into all this detail, but there's also a very strong neurological and biochemical response that happens when we're afraid. And in that fear state, the body doesn't want to create anything. It doesn't want to create health, it doesn't want to create love, and it doesn't want to create money. Because if there's a tiger in the room, all we want to do is run, hide, or fight. So there are so many adults even today, which is why if we can start with our youth in helping them to identify when they're in these survival states and how we break out of those survival states. What happens in survival is the opposite of creation. Because think about it, if there's a tiger, are we going to be interested in healing our body? No, we're just going to be interested in running. Are we going to be interested in making a lot of money or being really happy or falling in love? No. In a state of survival, we will only remain in hiding, fighting, or running. So we might run from our dreams. We might hide our talents. We might even fight internally within ourselves about, do I speak up to my parents? Do I share this with my boyfriend or with my girlfriend? And that internal conflict is what actually we're seeing in the world right now as external conflict. So when we actually begin as youth to learn what it is to end our internal conflict, because survival is also about conflict, right? We're in conflict with the tiger, we're in conflict with our boss, we're in conflict with our spouse, we're in conflict. But that conflict doesn't start outside of us. That conflict is actually within us. Do I speak up? Do I not? Again, whether it's with a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a spouse, a boss, do I speak up or do I not is an internal conflict. And conflict is survival. And survival keeps us from creating. I mean, there's a lot more to this, but that's the general concept. So, how do we break out of this? How do we first identify? We can't even break out of it when we can't identify it, right? We can't heal something or change something if we don't even know it exists. So first we have to learn to identify what are our personal survival mechanisms. What do I hide from? What do I run from? And what do I fight within myself? And as we break those down, we actually break down the old conditioned, like you said, Shaku, beautifully, is that these are conditioned patterns. This is what we've not only learned, like the ABCs, like I shouldn't speak up, girls shouldn't say this, men shouldn't feel sensitivity. These are conditioned and they're learned just like the ABCs. And so much of our conditioning happens from the moment of conception till about age 7, before our intellect really heightens or begins to heighten. So those programs actually are often not ours. And this is what's so important with our youth, is the programs and the challenges that we face are often not ours. They were learned just like the ABCs from our childhood, from what we saw. It does not make our parents bad or wrong. It makes us have compassion that they too have a story that drove what they did. But that doesn't mean we have to repeat that. So there's a lot of power that comes when we can have compassion for the past. We can realize that, I always tell people, when you're healing or when you're coming back into really stepping into your power, acknowledging your past, your parents, or what you saw growing up is very liberating, rather than holding us stuck in this sense that, my parents are like this, or my ancestors and my culture and I had all those things growing up in the US as an Indian girl. But when we can find compassion and understanding that nobody can give you more than they have. If you have $100 in the bank account, you can't give 10,000. So our parents, our society can give what it has. And so it's our responsibility as we turn into young adults to start realizing that, to say, you know what, I can now choose differently and not choose better, because better is a judgment that somebody else was worse. But we begin to choose differently. We begin to choose differently. We begin to follow our heart, something maybe our parents didn't do. We begin to speak up, something our parents may not have been allowed to do themselves. We begin to ask when our parents may have been told, don't do that, that's greedy. We begin to do it differently. And that's when we begin to step out of survival, because we're not in conflict and we're not in fear. That's kind of the gist of this.
That's beautiful, Shenal. That's absolutely so easy to comprehend and use as a model. So I wanted to ask both Santiago and Amaya, what would you have liked to have known about yourselves as teenagers? You know, what would have helped you prepare better? Because I'm sure that both of you, and I'd like to know what you were as teenagers, what you were like as teenagers.
I guess when I think about how I was in high school and middle school, I was a pretty quiet kid, and it's a very normal thing. And I hear it a lot from people, like, quiet kid. But I think there was this fear, as well as me being a quiet kid, for me being a sidekick. And I always felt like I was like a side character. And you know how we compare ourselves to what we see. And I always felt like I was not a main character in my story. So there was this like battle of me wanting to get attention, but not wanting to get certain types of attention. And I was very like, you know, I don't feel like I am a main character with myself in this community. I don't feel like I'm me in this community, but then who again is me? So there was that whole identity. And because, you know, you're raised with, and I've heard this in a way where it's like, basically your first influencers are your parents. So you're raised with your parents' values. Right off the bat, you go after like elementary, middle school, or high school, your primary influencers there are your friends. And so I think for me, I felt very kind of different from my friends. And it was kind of, I think, how I was raised. I was from, like, my parents moved from Dubai here, and we had not traditional Indian culture, like heritage, like practices, but we also weren't like a traditional suburban American family, how we were raised. So I could relate to my friends who were, that I got to know and met, who were from Indian culture practices, but I could also somewhat relate to my friends who were American, but I wasn't complete. And I felt like there was something wrong there. So I felt like a little sidekick or like a guest appearance. It was weird. And so I struggled with that. But then I think around junior year, I became very like, you know what? I'm tired of being a sidekick. And I took this path of like, I don't want to be a sidekick. I don't want to be a guest appearance. I'm just going to have my little own show. And that was me doing my own thing. It was, and thinking back, I feel like I was a little, and this sounds weird, but I felt like I was a quiet kid still, but I was in my own head, in my own space, doing my own thing. And that helped me kind of grow a little bit more confidence with myself being alone, because there's this critique that we have with humans where we're really fast to point out what we're doing wrong or what we're doing that's not normal. And when you look at what we see on TV, what we look on in stories, you see us always being with people. And we never talk about what happens when you're alone with yourself. And so that was a weird time where I really loved being by myself, but I thought that it was wrong. Like, oh, why am I not missing being with other people than I was in middle school? So that was kind of me as a kid. It was more kind of like figuring out who I was, where I wanted to be. And it took me into a point where it was like me being happy with being by myself. And yeah, I think that was my teenage years. Yeah. Okay, Santiago, your turn.
Yeah, in my case, I would have liked to know that I'm smarter than I was told I was, because in high school, back in Venezuela, high schools are very science oriented, And your grades on physics, math, and chemistry was basically, those measured your level of intelligence. And when we graduated from high school, they gave some people, based on GPA, they gave some people medals. And I remember I was like 0.20 away from getting one, and I didn't get one. And I remember my sister got one when she graduated, and I didn't feel like a failure, but I felt like I failed, like it wasn't as smart as the other people, and all my friends got one but me. And as soon as I moved to the US and I started college, I realized that I'm not supposed to be smart at that. That's not me. That's not what I'm supposed to do. And whatever I was doing, media studies and studying movies and studying stories and writing stories and everything, that's what I'm good at. Understanding the social impact that a TV show, that a movie, that a book can have. That's what I'm good at. And I was an average student in high school. And then to my surprise, in college, I did study a lot and I did try hard, but I also enjoyed my social life a lot. So it's not like I was suffering or torturing myself to get good grades, but I realized that doing what I loved made it easier for me to get good grades. And I spent my first 3 years of college with a 4.0 that I never knew that I could get because I was an average student in high school. And then I graduated with honors, which is nothing that any of my friends from back home has done, because some of them were pushed into careers and majors that they weren't good at. But I was lucky enough to have the freedom to choose mine, and my parents were really supportive of that. And I remember when I told my dad that I wanted to major in that, he said, whatever you decide to do, just make sure you're the best at it.
Wow.
Whatever that is, just make sure you work hard and make sure you're the best at it. And that's what I did. And I was really surprised when I was able to graduate with honors after not getting the medal in high school, which I don't care at this point. I got my honors thingies from college, and that's way more important to me. So that's what I would have loved to know, that I didn't have to be smart at those things. I could just be smart at my thing.
Wow.
You know, that's exactly what happened with me when I was in college. I went off into, I thought I should do commerce because that was what apparently would bring you an income for the rest of your life, right? So I did a week in college in commerce, and I just realized that I could not do that. You almost know your body has a reaction when you're doing something that you don't really belong to. And then I transferred off into literature and sociology, and I thrived. Like Santiago was saying, I just was on top of my class. And that's when you also know when something becomes so comfortable, it doesn't matter how hard you have to work at it. You willingly do it because you start. There's another analogy of how, you see the swan. When the swan is on the ground, you see the way it walks. It's awkward, and it doesn't look graceful. But the minute the swan hits the water, it becomes a work of art because it's just gliding. And that is what humans are supposed to understand, that there are certain things that we possess, these gifts, and a lot of times we just push it away because we are told that our gifts are not worth much. Like what Amaya was pointing out, you've got to be able to recognize that. So Shenal, my question to you is, there's a lot that's happening with blame and shame. And the part two of this question is also body image. That because we are seeing that losing weight now for teens and young adults has started earlier and earlier. You hear kids in elementary school being told that they need to lose weight. And it's also how it's being messaged to them, right? So I'd love to talk about that.
Well, it's so interesting. The irony of this, and this is probably a much deeper conversation, but different emotions, and you mentioned shame and you mentioned blame. I'll speak to both of those briefly. We know that shame, which is also kind of a a cousin to low self-esteem, low self-worth. Shame is a very low vibrational energy and emotion, and shame is associated with hiding. And oddly enough, the energy of shame actually can create weight gain. Because when we're in hiding, our body, our primitive brain begins to believe that we are in danger. That's why we're hiding. We would not be hiding if we were not in danger. And so it holds its resources. So the irony of it is that, first of all, the sad thing is that people, Shaku, not just our youth looking to lose weight, but all of humanity struggles in so many ways to find their self-worth from the outside. How much money do I make? What size pants do I wear? What's my title? We find our self-worth from the outside. And just like I was talking about peace, we want peace in the world, but we don't have peace within ourselves. That conflict, do I speak up? Do I not? Do I follow my heart? Do I not? These are internal conflicts that project out an energy of conflict in the world. And then it comes right back. Call it the law of attraction, call it resonance. It's the quantum field of how energy works. And so same thing with self-worth. And when you talk about blame and shame, they're actually rooted in low self-worth. Some people, when they feel low self-worth, will feel ashamed and hide. Other people, when they feel low self-worth, will project that everybody outside of them is at fault to make themselves feel better. So really, when we talk about even emotions, shame and blame, for example, we have to really ask why. Like I have a process that I call it's a self-interrogation process of how to actually get to the core issue. And the core issue is usually not about our body image. It's that we don't even feel worthy. Many times it's from how we felt we were treated as a child. Or, even if we weren't treated poorly, but, the sibling was getting A's in science and I wasn't, so all of a sudden now I don't feel worthy. And so the blame and shame game can be a compensatory response to something deeper. And so finding, I love this story. Apparently they suggest that maybe there's millions of souls waiting to come onto Earth. It's the University of Life. Being here is like being admitted to the University of Life, and it's like a big admissions process. I mean, I'm simplifying it, but it's an admissions process. And now we've been admitted into this University of Life, and then all we do is we complain and we bicker, many, or like Santiago and Amaya are doing, they're demonstrating what it is to accept the University of Life and to shine in it, whatever they are supposed to do in that University of Life. And in the University of Life, everybody has different degrees, different talents, different gifts. But in this University of Life, you have to get admitted. So there's all these souls that are waiting to come to Earth. And what someone had said, it's brilliant. What if we actually could realize that coming into this world was like winning a lottery, winning the jackpot? And that in itself, just being here, is our self-worth. Everything else is just us coming here and expressing ourselves, creating, experiencing, and enjoying. But we have mislearned that we come here to do all these things and then we are feeling worthy. It's again, everything I do, it's an inside-out job. We have to actually realize that our existence here is worthy, because it's like winning the lottery. Like, I got admitted to the University of Life. Like, I deserve to be here. I'm already worthy of this life. And we have to stop looking to create our self-worth. We have to begin accepting our self-worth. You'd be surprised that by shifting our consciousness, I've seen people lose weight. So it's not that we have to deprive ourselves to lose weight. Often it's that we have to fill ourselves with self-worth. and we begin to shed weight. It's a very interesting, well, there's, again, different emotions land in different parts of our body, and that's another whole topic. But yeah, I think that image is related to low self-worth, and self-worth is something we don't have to earn. It's something we have to say, thank you, I'm here because I'm worthy.
Well, that's a beautiful metaphor, Shenal. So I wanted to actually talk about, you know, what we're planning to do. And Activateen is partnering with Shenal Arimili. And what would you like to talk about our why we're doing this, Shenal?
I would love to. Okay, so as adults, and Amaya and Santiago, I know you're young adults, but as mature adults like myself and Shaku, we are learning things in our life and changing things in our life that we would love to see change earlier, so that issues with love, issues with health, issues with self-worth, career, don't have to take hold in the lives of our youth. And I think that both of us feel really passionate, you know, as both of us are parents, and as parents, we've made ample mistakes. But I have to say this, another metaphor, a mistake. That word mistake came from an old film industry, Santiago, because we see mistakes as things that we've done wrong, and often we associate that with guilt, and we often associate that with punishment, because, right, our judicial system says that if you're guilty, you deserve to be punished. Yeah. So what happens is we do this to ourselves all the time. We make a mistake, we feel bad, and then we unconsciously punish ourselves for that error. In reality, what if the word mistake is really just each of us being the director of our life, sitting in a director's chair, and we get to actually shoot every scene of our life. And if we shot a scene that we didn't love, what are we going to do? Are we going to beat ourselves up? Or what would a director do? He would say, take one. Oh, okay, you know, cut, take two. Cut, take three. And then, oh my God, that fourth scene was just perfect. So a missed take is just something that we need to do differently. Anyway, and revisit. And so I think that Shaku and I, from our mistakes, from our learnings, from our education, from our background, wanted to collaborate hearts and minds to help our youth to step in and become the leaders that they should be and can be at a very young age, and to help bridge the gap between the intergenerational differences. That's, I think, what we were. Yeah.
Thank you. And this is a 5-part series, and it's called Moving from Self-Doubt to Self-Confidence, Unleashing Your Inner Leader. It's because at the end of the day, if we don't learn how to understand ourselves, we are going to be walking around in the world misunderstanding everyone else. And that's a really difficult way. It's a difficult way, and it's a hard way, and it's a confusing way to live, right? And especially with what we've seen, you know, everyone talks about 2020 and what it has brought upon us. We're also realizing that this is a good time to do those retakes, yeah, to pivot, to give ourselves the opportunity. So for both Santiago and Amaya, is that something that would be interesting for, if you were a teenager, would you have found something like that interesting to do, to be part of?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we talked about it a few days ago, and you said that you wanted this to be something for both teens and parents. And I was lucky enough to have very supportive parents, and they always like uplifted me and everything, but I have a lot of friends whose parents always talk to them in a negative way, and whose parents just make them feel useless, and to the point where they actually believe that they're useless. And I think that could come in handy for a lot of people and a lot of families that are just pushing their kids into majors that they're not going to be good at just to make money and just to be somebody. And they're basically misshaping their kids, and they're setting them up for failure with both the speech of you're not good enough and you're dumb and you can do this or do that, and with just pushing them into the wrong field and not making them fit into the right element.
Thank you. Amaya?
Yeah, it's a great idea. I think the biggest thing that is the biggest gap between parents and teenagers right now is not really the age difference. It's just there's this kind of lack of willing to listen to each person's side. So I feel like I have a good relationship with my family, but I think that there's kind of this gap between like parents feeling like they understand what their kids have gone through because they went through the same thing because they were that age at that point, and then kids feeling like they're too old to remember or they don't remember at all and it's not the same, and there's this lack of bridge or this willing to bridge saying, okay, my parents may know some stuff, but let me tell them more about my view. And then the parents could say, I know what you're going, I feel the broad perspective of it, but let me tell you what I'm afraid of or why I've been pushing and stuff. There needs to be more empathy towards each other's sides. And I feel like once we become teenagers, there's this very common thing that we see in entertainment, TV, and even like with our friends where it's us versus them, which we can even see in everywhere in the world. So it needs to stop being us versus them and looking at a compromise or a collaboration. So I think having kids to be able, or sorry, not kids, teens or young adults being able to share their view and saying, I'm not hateful, I'm not angry, I'm a little lost and I don't know who I should listen to because I don't know if I want to be like my parents, but I don't know if I want to be like my friends, or I just don't know what is right or wrong, because at the end of the day, each side is learning. So yeah, I think it's a good idea.
That's great. Wow, this was so enjoyable, Shenal. I'm really looking forward to continuing this conversation in our series. Thank you all for joining. It was truly heartwarming. Thank you.
It is amazing. Santiago, Amaya, you both are beautiful young adults. Keep shining your light, keep following your heart, keep speaking your truth, because you have it in you. It's really, really awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Be sure to subscribe to our channel and to turn on the notification bell for our latest videos.